Hey everyone, welcome to the VO Boss podcast. I'm your host, Ann Ganguza, and today I am so excited to be with very special guest, Luanne Regis. Luanne is a veteran voiceover agent and talent agency executive with over 30 years of experience. Her career spans everything voiceover, all voiceover, including heading up scale departments at 2 LA boutique agencies, running the celebrity division at a top bicoastal theatrical and commercial agency, as well as launching her own Chicago voiceover department in 2007. After a year at Sound and Fury Casting, she now owns and operates her own talent representation agency, Regal VO. Luanne, thank you so much for joining me today.
And thank you for having me, Anne.
I love this. So I had such a wonderful time meeting you, like fleetingly at Mavo.
Yes.
And was so excited to get the chance to talk to you and work with you as well. You're going to be coming up soon as a guest director for me on my VO Peeps group. So I'm very excited about that. And so for bosses that don't know who you are, give us a brief bio of you, more than what I've given, in regards to your evolution through the years as a talent agent and representative.
Sure, of course. So I'll try to be brief because it is quite a long story. And, voiceover, people ask you, how do you get into voiceover? And I'm like, I sort of really just fell into it, which I did. Back in the mid-90s, I answered an ad. They were looking for a voiceover assistant, an agent, and one of the partners at a boutique agency was looking for an assistant. And I thought, this is great. Let me just try this. And I quickly liked it. I liked the fact that the voice can really be anything. It has nothing to do with your aesthetic, what you look like, how tall you are, what color your hair is. I loved that. That to me was a very creative aspect for voiceover. And I started there and quickly became an agent, a scale agent, and was there for about 5 years. I've seen the business really, really grow. And change too. And right around the early 2001s, when all of the theatrical agencies were getting into voiceover because they poo-pooed and they snubbed their noses at voiceover for so very long, a major theatrical agency wanted to have a voiceover department. And so they plucked our entire department from the boutique agency, which was Special Artists, which is where I worked since the mid-90s. And we took our entire business, SpongeBob and all, and set up shop at Innovative Artists, which was the bi-coastal theatrical agency that I was at for 16 years, including what you mentioned in my bio, starting a Chicago voiceover department for them in 2007, just after the birth of my daughter. So was there for 16 years, and you wake up one day and you have 800 clients because you represent we came with not only our voiceover department intact with all of our amazing clients, but we also were there to represent their clients. And they have a really healthy roster of very well-known TV and film actors. And that's where I began doing celebrity and overscale voiceover and really enjoyed it. But, like I said, you wake up one day and you have 800 clients. And that's a lot to manage, especially in the way in which I agent. I was taught voiceover agenting by one of the best. She's a mentor, Marcia Hurwitz. And, it's all hands on. It's more like a manager. It's not just submit an audition and whatever happens, happens. It's you pitch, you sell, you call producers. We don't do that anymore because the business has changed. But you're on the phone, you're calling producers, you're selling people, you're saying, I think you should really listen to Nancy Smith. She's really good on this read. That's the way I voiceover agent, and it's really impossible to do that with 800 people, 800 clients on your roster. So I went back to my small boutique agency roots, TGMD Talent, which is formerly Tishman Agency, and the owner, Kevin Motley, who's a dear friend of mine, had recently sort of reshaped his agency, gutted all of the promo and trailer announcer type guys, which was an avenue in which advertisers weren't going down anymore. And we built a really great roster of actors, well-known actors, working actors, which is all I know. I know about actors in voiceover as opposed to voice actors, and was there for 4 years doing that until the pandemic. And then after the pandemic, I thought, you know what, I want to try my hand on the buyer's side. I always wanted to try my hand at being on the other side of the business, not just repping. And so I worked at Sound and Fury, which is one of the, if not the top voice casting companies in the entire country, if not the world. And, really enjoyed my time with that team. They're like a family to me. And I missed representing talent and agenting. And so after a year, I decided to go back to it, but do it on my own. And believe it or not, I kept a lot of clients with me even as I left the agenting side and went over to the casting side, because I have a really lovely roster of very loyal talent. Some of them I've had since I started in the mid 90s. And they were very sad to see me leave the agenting side. So they sort of held on to me even while I was on the casting side. And once I decided to jump back, they were like, well, we're still here for the ride. Let's go. And that's how I sort of built my roster, my independent roster, I should say. And again, they just come at me. I have agents and managers and theatrical agents and commercial agents just wanting to work with me, and they throw all of their clients my way, and I don't refuse them because I love talent.
I love that. I love that. It's interesting because as we're talking, you're kind of going back and forth between casting and agent and manager. And, for the benefit of our boss listeners, what is your definition of the difference between the responsibilities of each? Because I think it's important for us as voice actors to know when we're trying to develop relationships, to understand what is encompassed in your job, because that makes us, able to communicate with you easier and, help you. Because I really believe it's a partnership, no matter what
it is
you're really looking for. And so I think it will help us as voice actors to work with agents or casting directors better.
Well, the reason why, and that's a great question, and the reason why the transition from agent to casting director back to agent, it was such a seamless one, is because a lot of what my job entails as a voiceover agent is casting. We work with casting directors, but agents also work directly with buyers and producers, as in they come to us looking for talent, and we sit there and cast in pretty much the same way a casting director who gets paid to do it does it. I sit there, I go through my roster, who's right for this, and I do essentially do a casting. And so a lot of my agenting is casting, but that's just sort of like the day-to-day job of a voiceover agent. Again, back in the day when we had booths and art and actors would come into our lobby and read.
Back in the day.
You'd be distributed copy, back in the day, pre-pandemic and all that. A big part of my job also was directing talent, not just sitting at a desk and agenting. I would go into the booth. I need to know what my talent does. I need to be able to sell that person. So in order to do that, I'm in the booth, I'm directing. And I really, really love that directing process because it hinges on such creativity. It's so creative. They get to play around. I get also to play around with them in terms of what they can do, what their range is. And that's how I know what my clients can bring to the table so I can effectively sell them. So it's casting, it's directing, it's obviously selling. It's very managerial as well because I'm, like I said, very, very hands-on. So, like for instance, many times I'd go into the booth with a client and we'd spend an hour in there if we have the time. And the last 5 minutes of that hour really is recording the copy and auditioning. But the previous, how many ever minutes spent catching up. How's your wife? How are the kids? How is life? How's your mom doing? Stuff like that. And that's how you get to really know clients, because what they share with you in the booth, you bring that to you as you're casting. You bring that to you as you're selling them. You have to really know them inside out. So that's more of a very managerial, I think, position as an agent. Not all agents agent that way. I just learned to do it that way. So it's managing talent, It's selling talent, agenting, obviously, but it's also casting and directing talent in the booth. And then, of course, your negotiation skills come into play. Your knowledge of
Sure.
contracts, your knowledge of legal procedures as far as contracts go. That's all encompassing as a voiceover agent.
It's such a broad base of skill,
It is.
skills that you need to have. And you said something before that I thought was so interesting. You said you had been working with, and it really, I think it goes to show the evolution of the business. You talked about actors who did voice acting rather than voice actors.
Yes.
And so I caught that little tiny nuance right there,
Yes.
which really speaks to your amount of time and experience
Yes.
in the industry.
Yes.
Because, how often, like, what would you say, I guess now because you've been in business for so long, you must still, I suspect, deal with actors who do voice acting and as well as voice actors.
Right.
And what are your thoughts on how you work with, let's say, actors now who do voice acting or voice actors differently? Do you spend as much time, or how does that work today?
The reason why, for me, it's actors in voiceover, not only was I brought up in the business knowing that, because when I started at Special Artists, they were mainly a commercial, on-camera commercial agency that, and this predated me obviously, but when they started their voiceover department, they used their on-camera actors as the basis for their voiceover department. So I come from a track record where the agents who taught me used actors and put them in voiceover and made them successful. The voice of SpongeBob, Tom Kenny, was a comedian, an actor. We put him, like he made that transition because of how talented he is. So I do feel voiceover is not just a voice. You're acting. You're bringing copy to life. You're selling copy, but you have to bring it to life. You have to connect with the product. You have to connect with what the words are saying. So at the end of the day, it really is about acting, which is why I favor having someone who has an acting resume, someone who's done work, because they have a certain measure of experience that they can bring to the voiceover table.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the emphasis on acting, because even for something like I specialize in a lot of the corporate e-learning, the non-broadcast style stuff. But in order to really bring that material to life, and sometimes it needs a lot of help. Just saying, because it can be a little bit dry and boring. Like you have to, every company, and I think whether you're dealing with commercial, right, any type of copy. If you're dealing with a company or a client, they're ultimately, unless you're doing entertainment, right? Ultimately, they're trying to sell something.
Absolutely.
And so there's always a story. Good companies, I would say that, it's marketing 101 that, stories really sell better than, cold hard announcing facts sort of thing. And so if you can be the actor that can tell the story or understand the story that the company wants to sell or tell, that's going to help them to sell.
Absolutely.
So I love the emphasis on acting.
You're absolutely right. When you say tell a story, that is really what it is. I was telling actors yesterday, you have to when you get a script, you create a narrative behind that script that those lines will support. Whether it's right or wrong, it's truthful and it's authentic. So you do have to connect with the product. You do have to connect with the lines. You do have to connect with the script. And the only way you do that is if you make it part of a story that you're telling.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's what's so, at least with students, when I'm working with them in the corporate narration or the e-learning, like, what story? I'm delivering information. I'm like, but there is a story, and you have to keep the listener's attention for longer than 30 or 60 seconds. This is not a 60-second commercial.
That's right.
And so even if I think if the story doesn't make sense, right? If they're reading the words and they're like, well, I would never really say that, or you have to create the scene in which those words make sense.
Yes.
And I guess my question to you is, what would you say is the main difference between on-camera acting and voice acting?
Oh, on camera acting, you have so much more at your disposal. You have what you look like, you have the physicality of being on camera. And this is why I love voiceover, because with voiceover acting, you have to basically emit all of that just
Yeah.
vocally.
Yeah.
Whether you're
Through your
in the
voice.
booth and you're, you know, where you see the animation characters, they're in the booth and they're using their hands and all that, that's all well and fine, but that does not translate on camera in the way it would if you were
Right.
an on-camera actor. It really does have. So again, what we go back to is telling that story. If you have a story to tell, it's going to come out in the words. It's going to come out in the smile. It's going to come out in the warmth that you bring out, or not the warmth, or the cold, or whatever it is the stories that you're telling. But it all comes from the heart. It all comes from here, as opposed to you being able to use your hands to gesture in a way that conveys whatever you're trying to convey in an acting, you know, when you're acting.
So, what would you say when you're working with talent? Time is precious these days, so I imagine that you probably don't have as much time to work with talent, let's
Yeah.
say on a job or an audition,
Yeah.
as you would.
Yeah.
What are the types of things that you find you're telling your talent to do most in terms of, you know, either following direction better or their performance wise? What are the kind of tips or tricks that you're speaking to most?
Well, it does
These
vary
days.
from project and script to script, obviously, but a lot of it is what I just said, you know, creating that story, creating that narrative. A lot of times, and this as specifically relates to commercial copy, a lot of times you get a script and you have no idea what the storyboards are, you have no idea what the visuals are, you just have maybe 2 or 3 lines and you sort of have to put it together. At that point, you have to make a very specific creative choice. This is the story I'm going to tell. So that's one tip, and we just spoke about that. There's a lot of non-announcery, non-polished, non-slick directives nowadays, and I always have to tell my clients, so here's what I want you to do. I don't want you to think about yourself on mic. I don't want you to think about yourself up there as a speaker or as an announcer saying something.
Yeah.
I want you to sit and talk to a friend at a bar, and you say what you need to say, and you come from that place, so that we can get you conversational, we can get you casual, and we don't have you coming out of the box like you're making a grand announcement. A trick I use sometimes is I will have them slate their name after they've done their session, after they've done their audition. Because once you slate your name, Luanne Regis, you sort of go into this, okay, I'm here, I'm announcing mode.
Right.
I just want you to tell me what you have to say on your copy. You can save the slate for later. So that's just one of the tips that I use. You know, the conversational thing, just sort of like bring it back home. If it's something that I feel they need to be a little bit more intimate with, I give them situations like, I want you to read this bedtime story to your 6-year-old, or I want you to sit with your child and have a one-on-one conversation with him or her. And, you know, I just give them a place from which to emote, so that we can bring that emotion into the copy.
And speaking of emotion, I find for me, just on longer copy, because if you have a particular energy or emotion and you continue for over, you know, a minute or 2 or 3 with that same energy, it doesn't necessarily allow the story to flow. And I feel that people might get into the rhythm of this particular emotion or this particular energy. And I feel with any good story, right, energy in your story changes and evolves, and it can evolve throughout, like, the course of one sentence even.
Absolutely.
And the energy you start with in the beginning, or the story that you tell in the beginning, isn't necessarily the same story that's happening or evolving when you're halfway through or 3/4 of the way through.
Right.
And for a lot of my students, I find that, you know, if they forget about the story halfway through, then it starts to turn into this kind of just into this news broadcast read, or you know, something like that. And so in the middle of the script, do you ever have to kind of redirect or give another scene to help this through? Or are you finding that for the most part you're working with top caliber actors that already are doing that or have done that?
Yeah, you know what, an actor is going to find his or her way. Again, you know, depending on the story that they want to tell. You know, the seasoned actors, the really good actors, understand how to flow in and out, how to make a change, or how to sort of navigate around certain things. And I'm glad you asked that question, because one point I really want to bring to mind is sometimes when you're directing talent, I can't tell you, yes, I can give you a line reading. Yes, I
Yeah,
can tell
yeah.
you how to do it. But I want you to color it the way you
Right.
would color it, because that brings a certain, uniqueness that no one else will do.
Mm-hmm.
You might put a pause in the middle of the copy for effect, or you could take a beat, or you could do a slide, and someone else will not necessarily do that, and that
Mm-hmm.
completely changes the way that copy gets conveyed to the audience. So a lot of times it's what you do specifically, and not me directing you into that read, because I sort of want it to come from you. I want you to bring that authenticity to it, because at the end of the day, authenticity is what will
Yeah.
may not book you the job, but it will have the producer go, wait a second, what, can we hear what he
Mm.
did? And that's what you
They
want to
might
do.
get you
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
short list.
exactly. That's what I'm glad you said that. I was saying this exact same thing
Yeah.
yesterday. It's like, yes, you want to book the job, but don't focus on booking the job. Focus on wowing whoever's listening.
Yeah.
Focus on
Yeah.
making an
Yeah.
impact. So maybe you weren't right for that job, but perhaps you
Yeah.
bring
Yeah.
you back in for something else.
And also I think then you're really, especially if it's an audition that you're submitting to your agent, or a casting director that is very familiar with working with actors
Mm-hmm.
in regards to, well, okay, it can showcase right away that you're an actor, and if
Yes,
you're an actor you'll be able to follow direction no matter what the direction
exactly.
ends up being, because I have a lot of times people will say to me, but that's not what it's not what I hear in the actual commercial. It sounds completely different, and I'm always like, well, it really depends on who's directing you at the time
That's
and
right.
what the client is listening to and what they hear
Yeah.
in their head as being the way they want the copy read.
Yes.
So
Yes.
you have to be versatile enough to be able to take any direction. So I've turned in, for me, as a coach, I've turned to almost saying, well, here, I'm coaching you on how to get the gig,
Yeah.
not necessarily on the final product, because
Right.
coaching you to
Right.
get the gig is going to make you the most authentic actor
That's right.
that you can showcase in the first or second sentence. So for me, Luanne, coming in the first or second sentence is so important with a
Yes.
connection to the copy.
Yes.
Talk to the importance of maybe that the first few words that come out of the actor's mouth, or in the copy. How important is that?
Very, very important, because again, when I worked at Sound and Fury and we got 800 auditions for one casting, they're listening and they know
Yeah.
right away if this person's going to nail it or not. So you want to
Mm.
come in just hitting the mark immediately. And
Hmm.
even obviously I don't have 800 clients, but you see that process with a casting director. They don't have the time to listen to the entire script if they feel you didn't hit it within the first, or maybe not even hit it. If you didn't do something in the beginning that made them go, let me keep listening. Because time is money, and they do have to get through all of these auditions. And the same to a certain extent with me. I mean, I listen to every single audition all the way through. But I know by the second or third line if someone has
Hmm.
nailed that piece of copy or not. Just because obviously I have the experience and the years and the instinct, but
Sure.
again, it's that you can't put your finger on it. It's that je ne sais quoi. It's like, oh,
Right.
oh yeah, let me keep listening. Oh wow, she did that. Okay, it really is important to nail whatever you want to nail at the beginning of the copy, as opposed to saving your
Yeah.
best for last.
Now, I love that you said you listened to the auditions all the way through. Now, why? Why do you do that?
For several reasons.
Hmm.
One, and you said something that I wanted to sort of bring back to the
Hmm.
forefront, so I'm glad you asked that question. A lot of times, again, I'm sort of a casting director when I agent, because I'm putting people on stuff and I'm wondering, is
Hmm.
she right for it? Is he right for it? I have to listen throughout the whole thing. One, because it's my client and they've done the
Hmm.
audition and I need to hear what they did. They may not be right for it. That way I know, you know what, I'm not going to put him or her on this anymore because I don't think they're right for it. Or
Hmm.
I hear something that they do and I think, you know what, I've got something else that I've got a different role that I think
Nice.
she's right for. I don't think I
Hmm.
put her on the right role. I think I need to get her on this other one. So it gives me a clue. It clues me into what my clients can do, what
Love
they
it.
can't do, even as well as I know them, even as much
Hmm.
as I know their range. I still am learning a lot about them as we go along. So
Hmm.
it behooves me to listen to everything that they do.
That's so interesting. I love that you listen all the way through because it shows that you really care.
It does, yeah.
And that you really care about your clients
Yeah.
and you care about, making the best fit and really choosing the best person for the job.
Yes.
And that, that just requires a lot of, I think, integrity. And I love that. I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
Plus, I think it's so interesting because maybe even, people that you've known for a long time, I mean, we continue to grow and evolve and learn and discover. I find with myself, like I discover new things about myself and it impacts, right, my acting in the booth.
Yes.
And, in lots of different ways where all of a sudden I'll be like, well, I've been doing it like this for years and goodness, I should have maybe thought this way. And it just will bring something different out in me, which is kind of cool. And so that's just kind of being the lifelong learner sort of, always trying to grow my skills and craft.
Right.
And you think like, well, have I reached this point? Well, I've done it and I'm an actor and but I feel like you never quite reach the point where you're never not learning.
No, you always are learning and you're always trying new things. And I'm always learning things about clients. I'm like, I didn't know you did that. That's great. That's good for me. I can sell you in a different way now. So it's a learning process on both ends.
So the sell, okay? I want to talk a little bit about the sell. When you're trying to sell a talent, what is it when you're communicating with a client for a particular spot? So what's involved in the sell of it on your end? I'm just curious because I have never, I've cast people, but I've never really had to hear my choices, and then the client will ultimately make, the end result. But when you're really trying to sell a talent, like what sort of qualities are you selling in the talent?
So you're talking about me selling to a buyer, a casting director?
Yeah, to a buyer. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then it depends on if it's the buyer's a casting director or if the buyer is the actual buyer, the producer, the ad agency or something. If it's a casting director, it's because I want that person to understand he can do this. What you're asking for me to cast for you, this guy can do this. So I need you to I send links. I send, if it's stand-up comedians they're looking for, I send a link to their stand-up. One of many different ways. I keep all of my auditions. So I will curate a specific sample of voices so that they can hear. For instance, if they're looking for something specific, I go back and I pull auditions that they've done for that specific character. And I said, listen, here's what he's done for me in the past. That's one tool I use to sell. And that's to a casting director if I want to convince her that this client can audition for her on a project.
Got
it. Buyer, the actual buyer, the producer, the ad agency, or it would be the producer and ad agency, because if it's animation, it's casting directors. Again, it's showcasing what they've done before, showcasing the stuff that they've done, showing them, oh, listen to this. I know you're looking for a guy that can do this. Listen to him right here. He's done this before. He's auditioned for this before. He's actually booked this before. Here's a spot that he's done. And you might want to listen to this. So that's what I'm pushing when I'm speaking to producers. Sadly, agents don't have that direct link to producers anymore. It's really become so remote now, and remote not in the sense of remote recording, but remote in the sense of we're far removed from these producers. I used to be able to pick up the phone and call a producer at Leo Burnett and say, listen to Nancy, she's really great for this. You want to hire her. And they would hire her. But they themselves, the producers, they're removed as well from their clients. Now it's the client, Walmart, that has to make the decision.
Sure.
Where the producer used to be able to make the decision before.
Oh, I'm so glad you made that distinction, because I think for a lot of voice actors, they don't really know what happens once they submit that audition. Like, then what is, how does my audition traverse?
That's right.
To either get to the ears of the person who's hiring, and who is the person that's hiring, right? Because I think if you're my talent agent, right, and I'm auditioning for you, what I love and what I've heard from you is that you must have a little file of me
Yes.
where you're keeping all my good auditions
Yes.
and you're keeping all the spots that I've done. And I like that, right? You didn't just trash my audition if I didn't work for that particular spot, but you're like, okay, so you've got like bits and pieces of me there.
Yes.
And then, so if you're working with another, let's say casting director, right? You can then send those files and sell me in that way.
Right.
But then if you're actually talking to the client directly, which is something I'm like, well, I've not, been in this process. So I mean, I speak with my clients directly, but probably not on the scale that you do because you're working on a broadcast scale.
Right.
Right. So I have a client that I've worked with for years and they'll ask me, who do you think would be good to do this for me? And I can refer, which is on a small scale compared to what you do, because you're talking to big time producers and agencies that have multiple projects going on. And so for me as an actor, I never quite know what happens once I submit that audition. So it's really nice that you just kind of explain that process. And the fact that you said you don't always get to talk to, the producer, like you used to be able to, which is what sometimes I assume, and I don't really know, depending on the agency, depending on who it is and what your relationships are, which I think it comes all down to relationships. But you're right. Now even the producer is removed because it really comes down to, like, let's say the client Walmart, or whoever that might be. So that's a very good thing to know from my perspective.
I'll tell you the reason for that, Anne, and I want to make sure people understand this because it was a very drastic change. I think the reason that I was able to, first of all, be able to pick up the phone and call a producer, and they would actually book, or the producer would call me and say, who do you have for this? We need to cast this job right away. Who do you have? Oh, book David Pasquesi. He'd be great. And they would hire him. So how many ever years, 10, 15 years ago when, the big ad agencies, the DDB Needhams, the Shire Days, the big ad agencies, they had the bulk of the work and they had the majority of the work. And as time went by, these smaller agencies started picking up work. So the ad agency now sort of lost the power to be able to make that decision because they themselves are trying to hold on to their accounts.
Yes,
so
yes.
They no longer can say, I can hire you for this Walmart voiceover. They now have to check with the head of marketing or whomever at Walmart.
Sure.
That never used to be the case. They used to be able to pull that trigger and go, great, let's hire him. That's no longer the case. And I do firmly believe it's because of that changeover in work. A lot of ad agencies lost clients. A lot of ad agencies are afraid of losing their clients. So they're really at the disposal, at the mercy of their clients to make every single decision.
That's very interesting. And that really speaks to this, I think, also the size of the industry over the years that has really increased greatly.
It has. Yeah. No, it has. You've had a lot of these smaller or maybe ad execs from ad agencies sort of offshoots and go off and start their own small companies. And they're now getting the big jobs. They're now getting the big work as opposed to those big, those multimedia conglomerate ad agencies that they're not really getting those accounts anymore.
Well, and now also I think, technology, I mean, gosh, technology has certainly evolved over the years. And now a lot of times, like you said, you'd meet and I'm from back in the day when I would go to a studio for a callback, and gosh, that's almost not the case too much anymore. I miss the days when you would see all your voiceover friends in the lobby, and even though you'd kind of be a little bit nervous, you'd all be like catching up and seeing people you hadn't seen in a while, and I kind of miss that. But with the digital evolution and people having their home studios and the internet, and I think a lot of those agencies too, I mean, went online. Am I not correct?
They sure did. They sure did, They really did. And to speak a little bit, I'm just going to air my pet peeve about that. Again, I remember a day when ad agency would hire a studio here, hire a studio in Chicago, hire a studio where they are, and they would connect. Now, that cost, because we've had a situation like the pandemic where everyone sort of had to get set up to record from home, a lot of ad agencies haven't gone back to that. Back to hiring studios. They've figured out a way, wait a second, we don't have to hire a studio. We don't have to incur that cost. We can keep that budget under control and pass that cost on to the actor. That's one of my biggest pet peeves of the consequence of the pandemic, where actors have now had to become engineers,
Yes.
incur their own costs for studios. I'm like, wait a second, you would hire a studio in
Yeah.
New York and in Los Angeles back in the day. We're like, how is that? I know what you're doing.
Yeah, and they're not necessarily, claiming, if I am correct in the assumption, they're not necessarily saying, "Well, hey, I've got a home studio. I should be charging for that studio. I should be theoretically, right? They are, but I don't know anybody that really like has a line item that says, "Hey, this is my studio cost."
No,
Right?
the actors sadly have had to fall in line, and now
Yeah,
we've
it
gone.
got absorbed.
It's just everyone is now remote studio required, home studio
Yeah,
required. I'm like, wait a
yeah,
second, you would hire a
yeah,
studio back in the day. I just think
yeah,
it's unfair because now the actor should be concentrating on his audition and he should be concentrating on the creative aspect. He should not be
yeah.
asked to upload stuff. He should not be asked
Right.
to be an engineer in his own session.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the way of the world now.
It is such a luxury to be directed, even in my home studio now.
Yeah.
It's just, and it's lovely for, I will say at least there's Source Connect, so that an engineer can take, what I'm doing back here, in my home
And
studio
do his
and
own
engineer
thing.
it. And I don't have to upload and he
Yes.
can just take it. That is a luxury. And also the fact of actually having a director
Yeah.
is a luxury these days. And I love it. And I kind of wish we went back to it.
I know.
And you never know. I mean, maybe that will happen, maybe that will not. But I think, in the end, right, is it not all driven by, the customer, right? The client, like it's Walmart. Like what do they want? Like,
Yeah.
and so ultimately, what type of voice are they going to look for? How are they going to hire? And I think that's something as a voice actor, we need to consider the business aspect of it, because how are we going to, kind of shine in front of all of it seems like obstacles, maybe not obstacles, but there's so many paths to getting hired
Yes, there
these
are.
days,
And let me go back to a question you
yeah,
asked earlier about what happens when that audition goes off. And, it's really important for actors to understand, like, because you don't book a job, that doesn't mean you weren't on a short list. That doesn't
yeah,
mean that you weren't listened to and someone was vying for you and that it just the client or whomever came in and said, no, let's go with a woman instead of a man. It doesn't,
hmm
I have no idea what happens once it leaves
hmm
my coffers because no one says anything.
yeah,
And then you get on a short
hmm
list and you have one of five on a short list and that's great. You're excited. And then it just goes away. But
yeah,
for
yeah,
me, that's a win. Like someone
hmm
listened to you and someone put you on a short list and someone considered you for this job. And even beyond the short list, you don't know who listened and went, wow, I really like
sure,
him. You know what I mean? It's
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
so
I
many
love that you brought that up.
intangibles and actors
Yeah,
need to understand that just because you didn't book a job doesn't mean you weren't right for it. They could have
yeah,
changed their minds, changed the specs, changed the age, changed the gender. All
yeah,
of those things sort
yeah.
of are out of your control.
Yeah, there's so many aspects that are out of your control, and I think that's one of the most important things that a voice actor can also do is try to understand that and not let the mental, like, oh my gosh, I don't
Yeah,
know what happened,
yeah,
or I'm not good enough, or
yeah.
that self-sabotage, get to them. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that a lot of voice actors
It
face
is.
is imposter syndrome, that I because they didn't hear anything,
Yeah,
they assume, right.
that's right. And by the way, that's another aspect of my job as an agent to sort of
Hmm.
manage their expectations and manage their disappointments. I had an actress
Hmm.
tell me last night, she said, I'm really just very dejected and sort of tired and fatigued with these auditions. I haven't had a callback. I haven't had this. I haven't had that. And for me, I do need to boost her up, but at the
Hmm.
same time, I do need to understand her frustration and it's real.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, my job there is to sort of maybe go, okay, let me reevaluate, excuse me, what I'm sending her. Maybe I'm not sending her the things that she's really going to nail because at the end of the day, as an agent, you don't want to keep sending an actor hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of auditions and they're not booking because that debilitates them. So
Yeah.
part of my job
Hmm.
is almost like a therapist, of sorts. It's sort of like
Yeah.
manage,
Yeah.
how they feel.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do this then. Let's sort of reevaluate what we send you. Let me pull back a little bit so that you don't feel burnt out. How can I help you? Because obviously I believe in her. I don't want her to just go silent and not do auditions, but I have to
Right,
kind
right.
of, hold her hand
Sure.
along the way. That's another aspect of the voiceover
Yeah.
agent's job, at least mine.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Oh, this has been such a wonderful conversation,
I know. I
Luann.
love your questions, by the way. Your questions are
Oh, oh,
very pointed.
oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, it's been a pleasure. And I'll tell you what, I cannot wait to have you as a guest director
Yes, I cannot wait.
for my group, for
Yes.
my VO Peeps guys. So make sure you take a look for that
Yes.
coming up soon. And with that, I will give a great big shout out to our sponsor, IPDTL. You too can connect and network like bosses. Find out more at ipdtl.com. Luann, this has really been amazing. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Anne, for having me. I really do love talking about this stuff.
Bosses, have an amazing week, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.